In the turbulent heart of Africa, where borders were drawn not by its people, but by foreign powers with rulers and pens soaked in greed, rises the voice of Ibrahim Traoré, the young Burkina leader who refuses to bow to the lies of history, or the dictates of imperial judges, declaring with fire in his words that Africa will no longer be defined by maps written in European capitals, by treaties signed in smoke-filled colonial offices, or by corporations carving wealth out of African soil while leaving its people in poverty. For too long, Burkina Faso and its neighbors have been forced to live with the humiliation of borders that divided families, tribes, and nations, borders that made no sense except to those who profited from division, and in every corner of the vast continent these invisible scars still bleed. Traoré's rise is not just political, it is spiritual, a call to awaken Africa from the nightmare of exploitation, a reminder that maps are not sacred when they are drawn by thieves, that sovereignty is not real when judges in foreign lands can sit on benches and declare who is legitimate and who is not. When Judge Thomas and his courtroom across the ocean dared to rule on the leadership of Burkina Faso, what they revealed was not justice but arrogance, the same arrogance that enslaved millions, that stole gold, uranium, oil, and cotton, that powered European cities while African villages stayed in darkness. And in that arrogance lies the very reason why Traoré's movement is different, why the youth of Ouagadougou and beyond chant his name, not because he offers empty promises, but because he dares to say what others fear, that Africa's future cannot be dictated by outsiders. It must be seized by Africans themselves. He speaks not as a career politician, but as a soldier who rose from the dust of the battlefield, who watched his people suffer while foreign troops stationed on African soil pretended to fight terrorism, but in truth guarded their own interests, who saw that every time Burkina Faso exported gold or uranium, it was not prosperity that followed, but deeper poverty, because the wealth left the country while debt and dependency remained. His voice echoes the spirit of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary who once dared to tell Africa to stand tall, whose dream was cut short by bullets and betrayal, yet whose vision now burns again in Traoré's defiance. He understands that Africa's chains are not only military or economic, but also psychological, chains that make its leaders believe they must always ask permission, that maps drawn in Paris or London cannot be questioned, that judges in America can decide legitimacy, and it is this mental slavery he seeks to break. To the critics abroad, he is a radical, a coup-maker, a rebel who defies international norms, but to his people, he is a shield, a voice of dignity, proof that Burkina Faso will no longer bow quietly while its land is plundered. He has expelled foreign troops, challenged the global order, and demanded that Africa's gold be refined in Africa, that its cotton be spun by African hands, that its young people no longer risk their lives crossing deserts and seas in search of dignity, but build a future at home where dignity is rooted in their own soil. His message is not isolation, but sovereignty, not hatred, but justice, not revenge, but dignity. He declares that Africa must correct the map, not just the physical map scarred by colonial borders, but the mental map that for centuries has told Africans they are weak, they are dependent, they cannot stand alone. And while international media scramble to paint him as dangerous, in the streets of Burkina Faso and across the continent he is seen as necessary, as a leader who embodies the anger of generations and the hope of millions, a leader who refuses to let Africa remain a pawn on the chessboard of global powers. For too long, Africa's resources lit the world while Africa remained in darkness. For too long, Africa's children grew up learning the history of their colonizers while forgetting their own. For too long, judges, bankers, and politicians outside the continent believed they could still dictate its fate. But now, with Ibrahim Traoré, a new fire burns, a fire that cannot be extinguished by court rulings, sanctions, or propaganda, a fire that tells the world clearly. Africa is awake. Burkina Faso is awake, and the time of submission has ended. Whether the world calls him a hero or a villain, history will remember him as the man who stood in defiance when silence was the easier choice, who carried Sankara's torch when others feared its flame, and who reminded his people that freedom is never granted, it is taken, defended, and lived. And so the story of Ibrahim Traoré is not just the story of one man or one nation, but the story of a continent correcting the map, reclaiming its destiny, and daring to believe at last in its own power.